The Harmonic Convergence, Chapter 8, The Trap of Christianity. As we continued sailing west, Maxim, who was at the helm, pointed Orca towards the city of Alexandria and its famous library to get a closer look. Once inside the great harbour and close to the Alexandria Library, a strong sense of foreboding washed over Maxim as he started to experience déjà vu. He placed his hands to his head as strong emotions were being triggered and starting to surface. "Are you all right, Maxim?" I asked tenderly. "I am not sure what is happening," replied Maxim. "I seem to be remembering something. Something wants to surface, but I can't quite grasp it. I am not sure. I know I need to feel my way through the feeling that I am experiencing to see what transpires." Maxim was feeling dazed and in an emotional state. However, he was quickly brought back into the present reality as Samira, who was unaware of his process, piped in with a question. "Well," said Samira, her eyes blazing and her cheeks flushed with excitement, "I want to know more about the Adam and Eve story. I am sensing that the Garden of Eden also was not as it was described in the Bible." "You are so right," said Ariana. "The Garden of Eden was not a paradise." Maxim swallowed hard as he pushed his emotions down and turned his attention towards Samira. "On the contrary," added Irama, "it was a concentration camp located beneath a city that is known in 21st century Earth as Iraq." "Oh my goodness," said Asteria, and fell backwards onto the Killam cushions. "I knew that the Bible was an anthology of historical events. However, I never imagined that history was so distorted." Minerva lay down beside her sister and began to play with her hair. Taking the end of one of Asteria's locks in her fingers, she tickled Asteria's nose. A smile crept into the corners of Asteria's mouth. "Thank you, Minerva," she said. "I am feeling a little better now." Altar nodded in agreement. It was an underground city where the Dark Ones experimented on the Atlantean Lyrians," he said. "The Garden of Eden, and this experiment lasted for about 2,500 years? "My gosh," said Samira, her eyes closed and her hand over her heart. Cinderella, also struck by the story, was clasping her hands together. "The Dark Ones put the Atlantean Lyrians into subterranean cities," said Dulkara, "implanting ideas into their consciousness from birth. They taught them that living underground was the best way to live because it offered the most protection, and the Atlantean Lyrians believed them because they were already mind-controlled." The humans living in the Garden of Eden were slaves without knowing that they were slaves, said Altar. They were given food and shelter within a controlled environment that sustained their physical needs while they were being mind-controlled. Well, interjected Naishara, it is no different to convincing people in Earth's future to live in large, dirty, overpopulated and sick cities. Exactly, said Maxim. Although they were built underground, these cities had advanced ventilation. That is why archaeologists do not understand why or how these subterranean cities were built. Yes, these cities were built so that they could accommodate a human farm, said Imra. The people of that time, the Atlantean Lyrians, would not have been able to grasp the advanced technology that was used. The secret to this technology, interrupted Maxim, was the curved shapes of the internal structures. In Earth's future, architects use straight, square, and rectangular structures that do not provide life force energy, or chi. In a round building, the air does not stagnate. They used atmospheric pressure and wind between the ventilation openings to move fresh air throughout the structure, said Dulkara. A round home with no straight angles is the same design that is used in most interstellar civilizations, I said. Of course, many of these homes are above ground and are not toxic. You can now see, said Sarah, why fifth density has its own set of trials and tribulations. The war that is raging on third density Earth is the same ongoing, unresolved trauma experienced by many beings in the fifth density. In reality, no one on Earth is a third density being. They are fifth density plus. However, they have been mind-controlled to be third density because their beliefs have affected their DNA. The issues that many people are confronting in the 21st century are the same issues that have been present throughout Earth's third density linear time. Well, said Altar, the third density is a matrix inside the fifth density matrix. And don't forget, added Maxim, the matrix, whether third or fifth density, while they are artificially orchestrated, are only able to continue to function because humanity is mind-controlled. In other words, it is humanity who perpetuate the third density matrix. Oh, the Alexandria Library is spectacular, interrupted Naishara as we sailed closer to this magnificent construction. Alexandria has been considered one of the greatest cities on the Mediterranean, explained Imra. It is also considered to be the capital of ancient Egypt, and later in history was named after Alexander the Great. Maxim stared at the library of Alexandria with melancholy in his eyes. Yes, he said slowly. Alexandria could be considered the intellectual and cultural centre of the ancient Mediterranean. And within the library of Alexandria are held many volumes of wisdom and knowledge written by the Celtic Druids. Oh, so written by us, exclaimed Cinderella. The historians in Earth's future say that the Druids and bards were primitive and did not write, said Imra, shaking his head. However, this is incorrect. Our writings are held in the library of Alexandria. Samira, squinting from the piercing rays of the sun, faced the Alexandria Library, and then, turning towards Maxim, she noticed that he, also, had a look of dread in his eyes. "I heard that on a future timeline," she said, "the library was burned down by the Romans." "Well, it wasn't actually burned down," said Maxim. "That information is incorrect." "To understand the story around the Alexandria Library," I said, "we first need to talk about the Druids. As you know, the Druids in Scotland and Ireland relocated to Egypt and began the pre-dynastic Egyptian sun cult. However, very few historians in Earth's future make the Ireland and Egyptian connection. Vespasian and his son Titus, said Dul-Kar-Ra, were military men who destroyed and murdered the Druids in Britain, England, Ireland and Gaul. They systematically destroyed all of the historical documents about the Druids' existence and the Druidic law in general. They were experts in the field of conquering any spiritual factions that did not fit into the agenda of Rome and removed any knowledge that was contrary to their story. Actually, said Altar, Vespasian's father was a tax collector for the provinces. They had no royal lineage. The Romans already had copies of the writings of the Druids, dating back 2,000 to 3,000 years, said Sarah. However, they also wanted the originals that were held in the library. Actually, interjected Naishara, the Library of Alexandria contained documents from all over the world, meaning that there were texts and relics from stellar people as well as the Druids, going back to the time of Atlantis and Lemuria. They took all of the confiscated writings back to the Vatican, said Maxim, and they then destroyed the copies. The originals are still in the Vatican Library in 21st century Earth. The Romans knew that knowledge is power, said Altar. They wanted the scholars and military analysts to scrutinize all of the writings carefully, and then they would distort the information and weave it into their own teachings. Of course, said Ankai, the Druid teachings are about multi-densities, frequencies, universal mathematics and science, reincarnation, interstellar travel, and technologies. They did not want the people to know about these higher frequency concepts. That is why the Egyptian history only goes back 5,000 years BC, and why third density Earth Egyptian governments go out of their way to stop any investigations that threaten their narrative. There is not a university or college in third density Earth that you can go to on any subject at all where they do not control the narrative, said Sarah. If you have anything contrary to say, you are excommunicated, defunded, and ultimately disappear. If you stand up or want to clarify the inconsistencies, they will discredit you. Vespasian and Titus were Roman generals in the service of Emperor Nero, said Maxim. After uplifting all of the original documents from the library, this father and son introduced a campaign claiming that a new Messiah would come to command the people. They claimed that this new Messiah, said Sarah, being Caesar, a self-appointed ruler of the time, was a messenger of God, or that he was a god. Caesar could then mind control the masses to blindly obey Rome. "Oh, this is similar to the story of Akhenaten," said Cinderella. "Exactly," said Irama. "This is how they operate." "This created a huge movement," said Dul-Kar-Ra, or revolt against Rome, instigated by the Gauls, the Celts, the Normans, and the Germans. This movement did not support the idea that Caesar was a divine figure. "The leaders who were guiding the rebels were called Messiah," said Irama. A Messiah is also known as Christos, or later referred to as Christ. Messiah, therefore, refers to any leader of the Palestinian Messianic movement. There have been countless messiahs, especially at these times. There were hundreds of them, dispersed throughout the lands. "A messiah," said Ariana, "means to bring balance where there is imbalance, and understanding where there is misunderstanding." "Oh, so the Choristus, or Door Crystal, are messiahs, and we are Door Crystal," exclaimed Samira. "That is correct," I laughed. "The word Christ is a distortion of the name crystal." "The Romans feared that this movement would spread to other parts of the Roman Empire," said Maxim. To counter this resistance, Vespasian and Titus sent a huge military force of 70,000 soldiers to crush the rebellion. Titus destroyed the cities in the area, levelling all of the temples and erasing every document of the time that had anything remotely to do with the Druids. They started in the Galilee region and moved south, destroying everything in their path. "Yes, and during this attack," said Altar, General Vespasian captured a Druid, or a Messiah, who was one of the leaders of the movement, and his name was Josephus Bar Mathias. While captured, Josephus presented himself to the general as a seer, and to gain his favour, he said that Vespasian would be the next Roman emperor. "So Josephus was a seer?" asked Asteria. "Well, all Druids had a strong sense of timelines and could see into the future, as well as the past," said Ariana. By instructing Vespasian in this way, Josephus Matthias committed treason against the movement because he made an agreement with the Romans that he would work with them, and in return, they would spare his life. Josephus, being a Druid, shared a lot of the Druid wisdom and knowledge with the Romans, and thereby he betrayed the Druids. "Is that where, in the New Testament, Judas is portrayed as the betrayer of Jesus?" asked Minerva. "Exactly," said Ariana. "The Senate," continued Dul-Kar-Ra, still with some power, pressured Nero to perform with their agenda because the rebellion was costing so much money and resources. As a result, Nero committed suicide the following year, and this left Vespasian as the next emperor. Titus, Vespasian's son, remained in his role as general of the Palestine area. Eventually," said Altar, "Titus ended up as the great hero of Rome." "To understand the frequency of these two emperors," said Maxim, They were the ones who built the Roman Colosseum. Ah, yes, said Samira, and the Roman Colosseum is where they sentenced people to death in front of an audience. The Romans realized that they could never erase spirituality with the use of force alone, said Samira. Therefore, they set out to influence or distort the religions of the time. Their plan was to form an ideology that was convenient to the agenda of Rome. Yes, the Romans introduced religious concepts to mind control the rebellious population, said Ankai. If they used religion as a weapon, they could rule the population. This is a weaponized religion. Religions force humanity into a low frequency and make them docile, agreed Irama. In Rome, said Imra, religions were a part of the state, or a branch of the state, and controlled directly from the throne. They were only created to bring about crowd control. Rome never fell, said Maxim. It is still in power. It only morphed and transformed over time. The Romans are the Illuminati, or the Dark Ones, and Caesar is the Pope. There is no difference. Rome has not fallen. It has just become the Vatican. The Flavians, and indeed the people in power today, are from the Illuminati, said Imra, and furthermore, these groups who are in power do not believe in religions. They know that religion has been written solely for the people. So, what happened to the Druids? Asked Samira. They captured some of them, skinned them alive, and then decapitated them, said Dorkara. Oh, my goodness, said Asteria, holding her hand to her heart. Minerva and Cinderella also looked shocked and bewildered. We all sat in silent contemplation, remembering these atrocious killings and bringing our attention to our hearts, to love, to being unified, and then, together, we raised our consciousness into our higher density frequencies. Maxim also appeared to change his previous cautious demure back into his usual adventurous self. I think it is time to prepare some refreshments, I said. Apple tea and various fruits were prepared and offered to us all as we sat together to enjoy the fair. Meanwhile, Dorkara took his position at the helm while Maxim joined us and lounged on the kilim cushions. Eventually, Samira brought our attention back to the revolution. So, did Vespasian and Titus write the Bible? She said. Yes, said Naishara. The Flavians and Josephus took the Druid teachings and created the Bible. It was Vespasian and Titus who ordered the scriptures to be written. The stories in the Old and New Testaments were actually stories taken from the Druid teachings, said Ankai, and then they were distorted or rewritten to fit the agenda of the Dark Ones for population control. Around the year 69, said Ariana, they wrote two different streams of Judaic religion that would work in favor of the leaders of Rome: Judaism and Christianity. Judaism is built on the Old Testament, while Christianity is built on the New Testament. Well, the Old Testament is essentially the story of Atlantis, said Irama. It is written in such a way that it has many interpretations. It is literal for the people. However, a scholar can read the symbology. There was also Islam, said Ariana. Islam is a combination of both. These three religions have been referred to in third density Earth as the three-horned monster. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is a crowd control machine, added Irama. These three religions are the same, with variants or modifications, to control each particular population and promote division between peoples. As we know, I said, over time, humanity became so mind-controlled that they would even fight one another in the name of their religion. Organized religion is always in favor of an omniscient, monotheistic deity that judges, blames, and incites holy wars. The three religions only serve to divide people, said Altar. Race, color, politics, styles of governance, education and science are all corrupted or used to set people against one another. And they will defend their religious concepts even with their lives, said Dorkara, because they actually become the religion itself. All religions, and specifically Catholicism, are the pillars of the third density matrix. The Dark Ones do not interest themselves in what each individual follows, I said, so long as they follow something and reject something else. This father and son, said Dorkara, as he tightened his grip on the helm, are responsible for causing all the suffering that the Catholic and the Judaic religions have unleashed over centuries. Millions of innocent men, women, and children, since the introduction of Christianity, have been burned, tortured, fined, and imprisoned. Countless unnecessary suffering has been inflicted upon humanity. And this, of course, is exactly what they wanted to create, said Minerva. Separation, division, pain and suffering. This is how they keep humanity mind-controlled. And the Druids are the fly in the ointment, I said. But wasn't Jesus a symbol of love and integration? Asked Asteria. Jesus of Nazareth is not a symbol of peace, love, or integration, explained Irama. It is a story to encourage humanity to conform to what is socially accepted. It is a symbol of absolute submission to the established power. As already mentioned, said Maxim, the Bible tells you to just believe, to be passive, to accept the conditions that the Dark Ones have imposed, creating victimhood within them, and then you will be saved. You do not need to question anything. After all, agreed Ariana, in their fabricated story, at the age of 33, Jesus was crucified for his beliefs. Indeed, exclaimed Sarah. It was easier for the Dark Ones to keep humanity as slaves if they were convinced not to defend themselves. When an individual delegates their internal power or value to another, they become the property of that person. Yes, said Sarah. The story of Jesus created an internal police within each person to prevent them from rebelling against the established norms. Humans have always been conditioned to depend on external authorities more powerful than themselves, said Ankar-e. And this indoctrination is instilled within humanity from a young age. Children are taught to rely on first their parents, then teachers in schools, and later authorities at work, politicians, and religious leaders. They doubt themselves and do not know what to believe. It is, therefore, easy to hook them into a religion that is carefully designed for mind control. Humans become attached to a religion because they are seeking to know who they are, explained Naishara. However, they are also attached to being told what to do and what to believe, so they will obey what has been dictated to them. Sarah nodded in agreement. The Church and the Dark Ones created Jesus because they knew that humanity needed to believe in something greater than themselves, someone who cares for them and has unconditional love for them. Ah, yes, said Imra. Many people have a personal relationship with Jesus. This is a dependency, and it has been instilled in them from a very young age. I reached over to take a slice of melon. Jesus is an internal mechanism that enables them to face the harshness of life, I said. Or they turn to Jesus because they feel lonely and unloved. Jesus is the only thing that keeps them alive, or the only good thing in the world and the hope that is outside of their suffering. I suppose this is why they blind themselves to the possibility that Jesus is false, said Asteria. Absolutely, agreed Shamara. I can see that if they gave up the belief in Jesus, they would feel as though they are betraying a belief that has given them emotional stability. They become addicted and dependent upon their religion and the enormous feeling of guilt and injustice for turning their back on their religion. It feels as though a loved one is being attacked, a member of their family, or even worse, the very essence of what identifies and defines them as people. And when humanity became despondent with religion and began to leave the churches, said Irama, the Dark Ones introduced New Age in 21st century Earth to capture the spiritually minded. The churches were losing huge numbers of people who had become despondent with the limited story that they were offering. New Age was very successful, and so another dogmatic spiritual regime grew and flourished. New Age, I said, was also designed to divide and conquer. Absolutely, said Naishara. It is heavily indoctrinated. It is everywhere, and most people do not even know that they have adopted these religions. Many New Age modalities, began Maxim, claim that when we are spiritual, we have overcome the ego. However, it does not inform us that the ego protects, edits, and denies what is really going on in our shadows. The ego is the gatekeeper to the painful memories deep inside the subconscious mind. While New Age tells us to let all of the past go, it will no longer serve you in the new energies. It does not encourage us to feel and integrate the pain that was trapped inside our body, usually from childhood, and referred to as the inner child. Furthermore, I said, New Age, in the same way as Christianity, teaches that we only need to be love, to be passive, and to sit and wait for a higher realm, a spiritual teacher, a solar flash, or even a government leader to save us, instead of encouraging us to do our inner work. It does not explain how our limiting beliefs, developed in childhood and through society, have created our reality. And by being unconscious of them, those beliefs are pushed deeper into the bowels of the subconscious. As we create our lives according to those unconscious beliefs, we create our own unhappiness. That is correct, Samira, said Naishara. When we do our inner work, we change our DNA, we change our frequency, and we change our timelines. When we feel the feelings that are trapped in our body, thereby healing our inner child, and understand our incredible power of thought, we can create our own salvation. These different and opposing religions have fractured the already fractured timelines to an even greater extent. Where is God in all of this? Asked Asteria, her eyebrows raised and her hands outstretched. Where is irrelevant, interjected Minerva, because Prime Creator does not exist in a locality. Prime Creator exists in everything, as a force that is known as ether, and ether exists in the consciousness of everything. Well, of course, said Asteria. That is what I meant, silly. Minerva pushed Asteria playfully, and they both laughed. When an individual only wants to see the good part of a religion, said Ankai, they are entering the game that has been wielded by the Dark Ones. It is not necessary to believe in Jesus to generate unconditional love and the elevation of consciousness. The Jesus concept holds an individual back more than any other concept on earth. It is important to be free of thought and believe in oneself without delegating one's power to anyone else. If you believe in something, said Sarah, it exists in your mind for you, but Jesus is not yours. It is an idea that was imposed upon you for control. Jesus existed in the minds of many. However, it is a story that was invented by a narcissistic Roman. Jesus is an egregor, or a phantom, created in the minds of people. In that case, Tinkerbell also exists, said Naishara. So, where does the story of Jesus actually come from? Asked Cinderella. Rome was collaborating with many Palestinian intellectuals, said Maxim. They could write convincing scriptures. Josephus was a prolific writer, and the story of Jesus is actually the history of the War of Titus. The Emperor of Rome, starting with Vespasian when Nero fell, portrayed himself as the living God, and Titus, his son, was the Son of God. Yes, agreed Altar. It is in the texts of the Flavians where the idea of the Messiah, being Jesus of Nazareth, is found for the first time. The parallels between Titus as a general and the story of Jesus is astounding, said Dulkar. The stories are identical. The Gospels clearly refer to Titus's Roman military victories. Yes, well, the one that I remember the most profoundly, said Altar, is that Jesus said, If the people followed him, they would become fishers of men. Titus slaughtered fishermen in the Sea of Galilee during his campaigns. His followers, or rather his lieutenants, began to fish for men with a spear, killing them as they swam away from the rebellion. "Oh, my goodness!" exclaimed Samira. "The first Messiah to appear was Vespasian, and the second coming was his son, Titus," said Maxim. "And for any student of the history of Christianity," said Altar, "Josephus is also associated with the origins of Christianity. Joseph, the father of the so-called Jesus Christ." "I remember you saying," said Asteria, her finger raised to make her point, "that the writers used many different characters from their own stories, both real and fictitious, and mixed them together to create the Bible. Virtually all Bible characters were based on real people who had rank in society at that time. These characters lived in Egypt, Babylonia, Rome and Greece, and are nothing but strategic fiction. The Romans even referred to biblical mystery as an excuse not to have to explain any details or to prove any of the stories." "You have it," said Maxim. "A good example of biblical character based on a real person is King Solomon," said Imra. "Solomon means Sun King, or solar worship, which is Atonism. King Solomon in real life is Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III was the father of Amenhotep IV, who became Akhenaten, a dark one, Amon or Amen. And they do not teach that in Sunday school," said Asteria. "But are there not characters in the Bible who testify to knowing Jesus?" asked Cinderella. "All of the characters who testify to the existence of a real Jesus come from the same source," said Irama, "and therefore cannot be relied upon as true. It is like writing a fictional story and then asking the characters of that story to testify that Jesus was real. They are all fictional and written by the Romans." "Yes, theologians rely on them to give authenticity to the story of Jesus," said Ariana. "However, to claim to have witnesses in this way is as absurd as asking the 7 dwarves to give testimony to the story of Snow White and her resurrection by the prince's kiss." "The large volume of historical works," said Irama, "and the researchers and theologians who have published them have either been paid by the Jesuits in the Vatican or by religious organizations that are partial to the Jesus story. In modern-day Earth, very few researchers have done an exhaustive and objective investigation about the existence of Jesus as a real person. And the few who have dared to do it have encountered strong opposition and social and academic isolation." "Actually," started Sarah, "the texts say, according to Matthew or Luke, which implies that it is being quoted. However, these documents were not written by these characters, and there is no record of the existence of them." Ankai poured herself some apple tea. "It was William Henry Burr, the author of Offenbarungen des Antichristen, who said, It is important to remember that in the Bible the words authorized and original are not equivalent to genuine and authentic or true. It only means that it is authorized by a higher authority. The evidence that the Flavians are the authors is overwhelming, said Samira. And if someone says that there are records of Jesus, of course there are records, because everything has been set up perfectly. It is interesting to note that the Bible was not printed until the Gutenberg press in 1440 AD, added Naishara. Before this, it was the clergyman's job to make known and enforce what is in the scriptures or Gospels. Also, they were not initially written in Aramaic or Judaic, but in Greek and Latin, said Altar. The followers of Jesus would have spoken Aramaic and were people without the literary skills to create the Gospels. Well, interjected Dulkara, the texts themselves are not a reliable account of Palestinian society at that time, because it was a conflict zone. There were few or no freedoms for the population, and it was a time when Titus dominated the area militarily to suppress the rebellion. So, if these texts were created by the disciples of Jesus, inquired Asteria, why aren't the Romans depicted as the invading force in that area? The rebellions would portray the Romans as conquerors. However, it is the Jews who are the agents of evil. Yes, nodded Irama, and these Jews were connected to the movement that the Romans wanted to stop. The whole story of Jesus blames the Jews for his death because the Romans wanted to foster an anti-Jewish environment. Of course, the Semites are not a people, added Altar, much less a race. It is a group of languages of the Middle East that includes, among others, Arabic. It has nothing to do with a people. Well, we are using the word Jewish here so that it is understood who we are talking about, added Imra. However, at that time, they did not have that name. When the Gospels were written, these people were later called Jewish people, said Maxim. However, they are a mixture of a next people, as well as being the people called the Hebrews, who came out of the great exodus from Egypt. So, although these people are basically loyal to the concept of atonist monotheism, said Asteria, what you are saying is that they were a scapegoat for the death of the Messiah, Jesus, or they were used as punishment for the rebellion against the Roman occupation. That is correct, said Maxim. What about the cross? Piped in Minerva. So many people worship Jesus on the cross. Well, said Ariana, taking a piece of fruit, the crucifix was only ratified by the Sixth Ecumenical Council in the year 680 AD. It was decreed that the figure of a man nailed to the cross would be adopted as an official symbol of the Church. Emperor Hadrian, in the year 722 AD, about a century later, ordered that motifs, paintings, and statues with Jesus Christ nailed to the cross should begin to appear. It was 700 to 800 years after the so-called birth of Christ that this symbol was adopted as something representative of the Church. And then, added Irama, The Emperor Constantine completed any alterations of the Bible started by Vespasian and Titus, stating that the Messiah, Jesus, was the representative of God on earth. This was the birth of the papacy. "Oh, the papacy!" exclaimed Samira. "Do you mean the beginning of the office of the Pope and thereafter a succession of popes?" "Yes, that is correct," said Irama, "and the appearance of the Gospels, stated to be official documents, came from Emperor Constantine and were compiled during the years 272 AD to 377 AD. "Actually," interrupted Ariana, "the name of Jesus Christ did not appear until the time of the Reformation, which was from the 14th to the 17th centuries. Previously, the names Yeshua Christ and Yeshua Christos were used." "And Yeshua and Yeshua were Christus from Jupiter, weren't they?" asked Samira. "Yes," said Ariana, "and they incarnated here on Gaia as high-frequency beings to change the system from the inside." "Both Yeshua and Yeshua," said Sarah, "were walking high-frequency beings around the same time as the fabled Jesus Christ. They were both messiahs that some theologians have lumped together as the same person. They were adopted as the saviour of humanity and made to fit into the biblical narrative of the so-called Jesus Christ, the only Son of God. Jesus as a character could not have existed," said Naishara. "His story runs parallel to the multiple other deities and characters in the ancient world long before him, such as Horus, Krishna, and Buddha. All of these characters in all cultures share exactly the same story. That is because all of these deities throughout history, all myths, stories, the Bible, and the Holy Scriptures are based on the movement and interaction of the sun, planets, moons, and constellations in the sky." "Ah, yes," said Samira. "Astrotheology is the science that combines astrology, astronomy, and theology, isn't it? I remember learning that these concepts are a part of the Druidic teachings that have been distorted by the Vatican. The Romans took the concept of astrotheology and built the character of Jesus." Irama took a piece of cheese and began to eat it. "It is through astrotheology it becomes clear that the biggest lie in his story is that Jesus Christ was an historical person." "We could say that everything is true," said Ariana, "because if you observe it, if you even think about it, it exists. But that is from the higher existential planes. When we consider the third density mind, there is the truth and the lie." Irama nodded in agreement. "Those who have the power dictate what is real and what is not real, and have the resources to impose their agenda and create the impossible. Mass deception." Maxim stood up and relieved Dulkara from the helm. Dulkara joined us and sat on the kilim cushions to enjoy the refreshments. It was Hermann Göring in Earth's Future who said, "The bigger the lie, the easier it will be to believe it." "And it was Mark Twain in Earth's Future," I added, "who also said, It is easier to deceive a man than to convince him that he has been deceived. Well, can you explain a little about astrotheology? Asked Cinderella. I am intrigued. In astrotheology, I said, the concept of a saviour refers to the sun, as in, the sun is the saviour, or the sun has saved me. It comes from ancient times because at night wild predators can hunt people, so the sun has freed us from danger. Yes, agreed Ankai. If one replaces the word sun, S-O-N, with the word sun, S-U-N, when reading the Bible, it will become evident that each verse fits into the literal heavenly sun and not a man. In ancient Egyptian mythology, the name of the sun was Ra. The sun is our knowledge, because without it we cannot see, added Naishara. So the sun is lucent, or Lucifer. Well, the sun's light is a phenomena that has metaphysical properties, interjected Imra. It is Luciferian. Lucifer is the sun that is born. It is not negative. Ah, yes, exclaimed Minerva. I remember how we talked about the Dark Ones reversing everything to confuse people. The sun and Saturn are Jesus and Satan, said Altar. The sun is the hottest celestial being and, as our saviour, brings us light, love, and spring and summer. Saturn, or Satan, is the coolest planet and brings the winter time, the Iron Age, and the night. Therefore, Saturn is also called the Black Sun. The planets are the atoms of the sun, I said, and so are we, and that is why we are called children, or youngsters, meaning young stars. The sun is the only light that gives us direct light. All of the planets and moons only reflect the light of the sun. In astrotheology, said Sarah, the life of Jesus represents the sun moving through the 12 signs of the zodiac. Oh, really? The zodiac! Exclaimed Asteria. Oh, I know, said Shamara, excited that she was remembering a conversation from another timeline. Our spirit enters the solar system through the rings of Saturn. We are interviewed by the Federation, and after designing our experiences, we are born, or enter, Gaia. That is correct, I said. We are baptized on earth with a body. The Christ that came into the flesh is the consciousness of mankind. The most obvious astrological symbolism of Jesus is the 12 disciples. They are the 12 houses of the zodiac. Oh, I see, said Asteria excitedly. So the sun moves through each sign of the zodiac, being the 12 signs, and this is interpreted as the 12 disciples. Bravo, said Naishara. And Jesus Christ was born of a Virgin Mary in Bethlehem. His birth was announced by a star in the east. The star in the east is Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, and on the 25th of December it aligns with the 3 bright stars of Orion's belt, known in ancient times as the 3 Kings. On this date, they all point towards the sunrise, and this is why the 3 kings followed the star in the east. Actually, said Altar. There was also no place with the name Nazareth. Nazareth is derived from the Egyptian Nazir. Nazir means Na Sirius, or the star Sirius. So, is Mary the sign of Virgo, Samira? Asked Samira, staring into my eyes. Yes, I laughed. The birth of the Son to the Virgin Mary is symbolic of the constellation Virgo, the Virgin. Virgo is also referred to the house of bread, and Virgo is represented as being a virgin holding a sheaf of wheat. This house of bread represented August and September, the time of harvest, and the term Bethlehem literally means house of bread. There never was a town called Bethlehem either. The opposite sign of Virgo is the constellation of Pisces, interjected Maxim, which is represented by two fish. Christianity for 2,000 years has used it as its main symbols, the two fish and the bread. Dulca nodded in agreement. Jesus, in the Bible, was at the highest when he was 12 years of age, because the sun at noon is at its highest point. And in Scorpio, I said, my eyebrows raised, Jesus is kissed by Judas and betrayed. However, this story only demonstrates the sun's journey through Scorpio. When a person is bitten by a scorpion, it leaves a mark that looks like lips, or as though one has been kissed. The sun, said Ariana, when it reaches Scorpio, is also falling, meaning that we are approaching fall. Oh, I am getting it, announced Minerva. On the winter solstice, being the 22nd of December, the days become shorter and colder, and the sun is at its lowest point in the sky. This symbolizes the death of the sun. The sun appears to stop moving south for 3 days and resides in the vicinity of the Southern Cross constellation. Therefore, the sun is buried or dies on the cross. Is this why the so-called Jesus who died on the cross was resurrected 3 days later? Asked Cinderella. You are onto it, said Irama. And the sun moves in a 30-degree precession through the 12 signs of the zodiac, taking approximately 30 days. It enters each sign at the first degree and exits each sign at 33 degrees. Therefore, the sun, or Jesus, dies at the age of 33. Ah, so, said Asteria, looking at her sister. On the 25th of December, the sun moves 1 degree north, and now the days will be longer, and there is the promise of spring. So the sun is resurrected after 3 days and is born again. The sun then begins its path to the promised land. So although the sun dies on the 21st of December, it stays unconquered. Are you reading my mind? Asked Asteria, gazing at her sister. We all laughed. At the spring equinox, said Sarah, being Easter, the sun overpowers darkness and the revitalizing condition for spring emerges. The equinox and solstice mark the beginning of a new season, added Ankai. There are 2 equinox points each year, being spring and autumn, and 2 solstice points, being summer and winter. They each correspond to one of the 4 cardinal signs of the zodiac, also known as the cardinal axis. The equinox and solstice are represented on the zodiac wheel as a cross. And Mary, or Virgo, began Cinderella proudly, is always next to the cross, being the autumn equinox of Libra. I suppose this is why Jesus in early occult art is always shown on the cross, said Samira, and the sun can be seen in the clouds, up in heaven, with his crown of thorns or sun rays. Absolutely, said Altar, and the idea to crucify Jesus was to dramatize the Messiah martyr so that the people felt compelled to follow him, hence the concept that Jesus died for their sins. Also, the story of the crucifixion was a warning to anyone who had any thoughts about causing trouble. In fact, said Maxim, the punishment of crucifixion was invented by the Flavians and was not practiced until after 800 AD. Of course, the symbol of the cross predates Christianity, said Ariana. On the 21st of September, said Irama, the sun is entering the constellation of Libra, the scales of justice. On this day we will be judged. Ankai nodded in agreement. The equinox point of the zodiac on the 21st of September is also called the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil. On this point, we still have a vision of the promised land, and we are also entering and seeing the winter, which is cold and dark. Remember, the warmth and regeneration is good, and the cold and dark is evil. We can see both good and evil. And I suppose, said Cinderella, her head inclined, the four Gospels in the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, are the four seasons. Yes, said Sarah. And this is why religious people are forbidden to use astrology. It is said that it is nonsense and that it has no value. However, the kings and billionaires use astrology. And the idea that God is in heaven, therefore not on earth, isolates people from love and respect for nature. As the sun slowly sank over the horizon, the tiny particles of sand that were held in suspension in the upper atmosphere glowed with an iridescent deep red that illuminated the magnificent vista of Alexandria. Maxim decided to anchor for the night at the small island of Pharos, just off the coast of Alexandria. Watching the sun sink below the horizon, we contemplated the story of the Druids and the importance of standing in our sovereignty. As we settled down to sleep on deck, our thoughts were filled with the numerous stories shared throughout the day. Our imagination was stimulated with so many new possibilities for an exciting future. And so, my journey continues.